Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mindful Marathon Conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Quirk. I'm a pediatrician and a run coach and the founder of Mindful Marathon, where I help make running easy and fun for busy professionals. And today I have a very special guest with me. I'd like to introduce Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. Dr. Alexandra, thank you so much for being here. And will you tell us who you are and a little about yourself?
Yes, I'm really glad to be here. And I have to just say right off the bat, I have four children. My youngest is 11, and he was with me while I was preparing for our conversation, listening to other interviews that you've done. And he just turned to me and said, "Why are you going to be on the show?" And he's a very devoted, disciplined, avid athlete. In fact, this morning we were up early because he had a session with his agility coach, running coach, although his primary thing is baseball. And he's like, "Why are you going to be on that show?" And I thought, I see his point and he's totally wrong. So I'm Alexandra Stockwell. I am a physician. I'm an intimate marriage expert. I'm known as the intimacy doctor. Although, if you're listening with people around you, you don't need to put in headphones. We're not going there, but I'm a relationship and intimacy coach. And really, the reason I'm here is because I'm totally devoted to changing the cultural narrative around long-term relationships, because typically people think, the longer you're together, it's just inevitable. The passion tapers off and the excitement. And yes, when all goes very well, you can be blessed with companionship and collaborative decision making, and you enjoy one another's company. But there is so much more that is available. And I'll just say that my book is called Uncompromising Intimacy. I'll say a little bit about my methodology, the Uncompromising Intimacy methodology. And I have a podcast, the Intimate Marriage Podcast, which is one of the top 100 relationship podcasts on iTunes. And while many relationship coaches are helping people who are dating and, what do I wear? What do I say? That's not, I mean, I can serve, but my real passion is couples who are committed to one another, who get along, but so much more is possible because the relationship has become relatively dehydrated. And I would like to just say my fundamental principle and approach to relationships, because then with that context, we can go anywhere as it pertains to running and all of the circumstances and context, both in one's own mind and body, and also in the relationship and the family life. So, does that work for you?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay,
This is a fabulous. We're setting the scene, everybody, because I think, yeah, at first when we were talking about what to discuss and intimacy and all of that, and my husband was like, "Well, what if children are listening?" And I said, "That's fine. We're, it will be fine. This is PG."
yeah, it's PG. It's actually, quite frankly, G. I
Mhm.
mean, if you watch Disney movies, there's plenty of innuendo that goes over children's heads. I won't have near as much innuendo. And really, we can have a very rich conversation because it's not actually in the language. I'm not giving an anatomy lesson here. I'm talking about how things can really flourish in a marriage. And a lot of that is just in the tone of voice, in the implication about how much connection you can have. If you read that script, it's totally benign. And I actually, one of the terms I've coined is discrete eroticism. Like, I think it's so important to be able to feel these feelings while attending to family life and professional responsibility. So, anyway, the thing I want to say is that far and away, the very most common relationship advice that is given in the Western world, perhaps the whole world, I just don't have reason to know, but certainly in the Western world, the most common relationship advice that is given is that you have to learn to compromise. If you want a happy marriage, you have to be good at compromise. Compromise is the way to keep the peace and have a long lasting good relationship. And that is completely wrong. If what you want is a pleasant, bland companionship, what I usually describe as the conflict free, passion free relationship, then yes, compromise is an excellent tool. And I want to say people come from a variety of situations, and this bland companionship may sound ideal to someone. And if that is the case, compromise is your friend. But if you want vitality and self expression and experiences that the poets describe, and really to feel alive in your relationship in body, mind, and soul, then uncompromising intimacy is the way to create that. And what I mean is that with compromise, you're basically withholding what's important to you. To make it very specific to this conversation, you want to start running, but you don't say so because your partner will be uncomfortable. In other words, compromise equates to prioritizing our partner's comfort over our own vitality, desire, self expression, wholeness. And so when I talk about uncompromising intimacy, I do not mean that you always get your own way, you don't compromise, and it's my way or the highway. That's not what I'm pointing to at all. With uncompromising intimacy, you honor your own experience, your desires, your challenges, your rich inner life, your feelings, and you share them with your partner in a way that they can hear it and ideally respond in kind. And so to really have a marriage that marinates in and is radiating uncompromising intimacy, that takes really getting to know yourself
Mhm.
and also getting to know your partner so that you can share successfully. So a lot of my coaching and my online courses are really the very specific mechanics. It's not mysterious. There's a technology to the benefits of uncompromising intimacy. So I wanted to lay that out because really our conversation will be, how does this apply when somebody wants to run?
Yeah.
Any questions, anything I should
Oof,
attend to complete that?
I feel like you gave us a masterclass for the last 5 minutes, so thank you.
Well, you're
No, that was
welcome.
I took some notes. I was like, this is gold. Yeah, I think, a couple of things come up as you were talking, but um I think I'm thinking of two runners in particular, like the person who wants to start running, and then maybe also the person who wants to take their running to the next level, maybe like run their first marathon. Because the
Yes.
difference in, starting to run and taking on this new hobby, however we think about it, that does take up some time. And there are lots of thought hurdles that I help people through with that. But then that second runner, who's going to maybe run a marathon, like a lot of the questions that come up, maybe we can talk about that too. So maybe let's start with the new runner.
Okay, that sounds good. And I would love for you to, you know, maybe role play that new runner. What exactly are their questions? Because I'm sure I can respond, but I don't have new runners talking to me. And I don't have my own expertise to draw, my own personal experience. But the one thing that I will say is that the reason these two very different scenarios are challenging in their own right is because each of them involves changing the culture of the marriage. And we don't usually think of it that way. For, let's just say, whether it's a woman or a man, who wants to start running, it's about their relationship with themselves. It's health, it's energy. I mean, there's so many reasons to run.
Mhm.
And in general, we especially for busy professionals, we go so far as to realize there's a logistical element that needs to be handled. Like if there are young children, for example, if I'm going to run, then who's going to be with them if it's a time that I normally would be them with them. There is a logistical element that needs to be navigated depending on the family context,
Hmm.
or if you have a spouse who either is cooking or not cooking but expects dinner at a particular time, and then you're not available because you want to run before you have your big meal of the day or something like that. Like, there's the logistical element which we can talk about, but I really want to point towards changing the culture of the marriage, like changing the identity of the marriage. If there's a marriage where either both people aren't really taking care of their health,
Hmm.
or one person is and the other one isn't, then there's a lot of different things that sort of create an energetic web in terms of communication and assumptions and roles in the marriage. And so you just want to learn to, you just want to become a runner,
Hmm.
but it's unavoidable that you're touching all of these other things.
Yeah. Yes. 100%. And I think it always the first step usually is figuring out the logistics of just the how, like how do I fit this in? And I think we do a fairly good job of that in the coaching program, and kind of, yes, I sometimes feel like we're squeezing it into pockets of time, but as the person starts to really love this sport and want to take it further, and now it's taking up more time, it's, ooh, maybe I would like to run a race that's not in our town. I would like to take a trip with some runner girlfriends, things like that, where maybe some problems arise. um, Go
Yeah,
ahead.
and this actually is exactly why I wanted to, early in our conversation, talk about uncompromising intimacy, because there's no way for the new runner or the upgrading runner to pursue that unless they first honor their own desires. There's
Mhm.
a there's a self-worth involved before even running, to just value the desire to run. And if it's logistically inconvenient, or it's just not what happens in your marriage, then that very step of making it a priority is what I would call a move into being uncompromising. And so just to be aware that that is the case. Like, if your partner somehow feels rejected and it's confusing to you, because like you just want to be healthier, you want to have more energy, you want to be more available for the relationship and for parenting, it's like, why would this be complicated? Well, there is this subtle reality that is not problematic, even though when I say it, it might sound that way to someone, that choosing to run really is turning away from your partner's comforts. But I don't think there's a problem with that. I think it's essential for an ongoing, vital, nourishing relationship, that there are many times where you want to do the both and, but the only way to get to the both and is to really prioritize yourself more than you've been used to doing.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think, there are a lot of partners who maybe aren't runners, but maybe they have a sport. So I have a lot of couples who maybe the my runner wants to run and their partner is a cyclist. So
Mhm.
in at least in that sense, I think when the partner also has similar interests or with exercise and they know how good it makes them feel, it's maybe a little bit easier to get them on board. But if you have two people who aren't so used to exercising and fitness, it's you kind of, after a while, you want to bring the other person on board, and sometimes they don't want to come too.
Yeah, and so For someone who is a busy professional, it can be very easy to give all of the reasons, almost like it doesn't have the tone of a debate, but you're trying to convince your spouse of the merits, for this reason and this reason and
Yes.
this reason and this reason. And sometimes that's enough, but many times it's actually not enough. And when it's not enough, I really recommend making a vulnerable communication, sharing less about the logical reasons why you want to do it. In other words, less of a left brain kind of communication, and allow yourself more of a right brain communication. Like, I'm going to just say a bunch of different things. It's going to be unique for each person, but like, you know, honey, I never told you this, but this is something I have always wanted to do ever since I was in fifth grade when I watched my first track meet. And, for this reason in high school, and then I was, all it, but like, this is a dream I've always had, and I would love your support. Even if you don't give all of the like
Hmm. Hmm.
to-do list kinds of accounting. That's one way you might share it. And that's going to, in a marriage with kindness, that's going to get a totally different response than if you're just talking logistically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing you might say is, I love being married to you and I want to do it a long time. And even though this is inconvenient now, and you might think I'm going to be less available, and in a way I will be logistically, my whole motivation is to be more available ultimately. These are the kinds of communications we don't tend to make when we're trying to fit something in the schedule.
Hmm.
But it actually is the flavoring that makes it, I was going to say the lubricant that really helps your partner really support you in a way that is really different than figuring out the carpool schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. But maybe also not the most natural conversation for some of us high achievers who are used to to-do lists and the logistical left brain.
That is a very elegantly stated massive overstatement. That is correct. Not so easy for the accomplished, educated professional. And, you know, it may be one of the motivations to run is to get out of your head a bit and
Mhm.
into your body. And so maybe for a runner listening, what I'm talking about is just too much before you run, and you have more of a left brain conversation to make room for it. And so you can go running, but I would encourage you afterwards, when you've got the endorphins going and you're less in your head and left brainized, to really say, I loved doing that. Where appropriate, thank you for your support and encouragement. I've always wanted to do this and it feels amazing. Or I've always wanted to do this and I had no idea how hard it would be in this heat. Like, it doesn't have to all be,
Sunshine and
rainbows and
roses.
yeah, no. It's more like authentically. I mean, I don't recommend that you routinely complain about running because that makes it harder for your partner to support you on the journey. But if sometimes you have a hard moment, you can share that too. So, really, we could give like a variety of kinds of examples, but if what you want is for your time away running for lots of great reasons to be something that actually brings the two of you closer together, well, it can, because it clears your head and it's self-care and all those things that I think are pretty straightforward. But it also can, if you communicate about it in this more vulnerable, heartfelt, and often um, uncommon way,
Mhm.
that's what allows running to be something that brings you so much closer, even as you do it for yourself.
Yeah. Oh, I love the way you put things. And I mean, I'm going through in my head, my husband is a runner, and I feel like we have been on this journey together since we started around the same time, but I also can appreciate when the partner is not a runner or has another interest. So, thank you. This is wonderful.
Well, and also, what it means to you and what it means to your husband, it would be easy to think it's the same, and I'm sure there's a great deal of overlap.
Mm,
But how fascinating to discover what is unique that you would never know unless he shares with you, which he's not that likely to do unless you really ask and listen in a very generous manner.
yeah. And it is, I think it is different for both of us. Of course, there is some overlap, but yeah. And he's a much faster runner. Like when we don't run together. Like we may go out at the same time, but we don't stay together.
Yes, yes, yes.
And we may run the same race, but he's usually finishing a lot more quickly than I am. And that's
And is
fine.
that complicated for you?
It
I
used
mean,
to
you're
be.
not talking about it as though it is, but I would think that's something that people encounter.
Yeah, it used to be when we started, I really wanted to run with him. And I was using when I started like run walk intervals, and that would just drive him batty. Like he could slow down, but he couldn't do the intervals. And so but we've talked about this over the years. And so now there are some times where we'll go out, like if he's doing an easy pace and we'll stay together, but the majority of the time we run at the same time but separately. And it works better for everyone. And
That's
we
so interesting. Yeah. Um, so for someone who wants to up their game and go travel, there's a way in which pretty much everything I've said for the new runner, it's like different illustrations, but same principles. Is there anything that, like a scenario that you might share where we haven't really provided what someone would need to navigate that?
Yeah, I think we'll go to the marathoner or the person who wants to run
Yeah.
the first marathon. So I have a lot of people who will kind of work their way up, like that they start, then they get hooked. This is wonderful. They do maybe a half marathon or multiple half marathons and then decide like, hey, I do want to try to tackle this marathon. And then they realize usually first it's the amount of training or how many months, the training is going to take, anywhere from 4 to 6 months, depending on where you're starting from, maybe even longer.
Mm.
And a lot of times people will pick a marathon that is a destination race, or maybe they enter the lottery for a world major marathon, something like that. So there are logistical variables at the beginning, but when they see how much time the training is going to take, and then they think like, what is my partner going to say about this? I don't know how we're going to make that work, but usually they say we'll just figure it out, which is good. But I think as that training picks up, especially into later months toward like the peak weeks, I mean, it's a lot of hours of running. I mean, sometimes these long runs are 3 hours. That's a long time to go out on a Saturday, especially if you
For
have little ones.
sure. Yes.
So if
So,
yeah, go ahead.
um, I'm picturing your client, the runner who wants to do the marathon and then realizes what's involved. And they're like, whoa. And then there's the question, do you tell your spouse or wait and let them figure it out? Because if you tell them, that could be complicated. And so I think, you know, what the answer for that is, I don't have a general answer. I wouldn't just say, oh, definitely tell, because their experience is so different. For them, even if they're happy for you, they really are going to, until they experience otherwise, be oriented to the loss. Like they're losing something. They're losing you. They're losing their free time to putter. They're, that's the most evident thing.
Hmm.
Whereas for the runner, yeah, they're losing a certain amount of unscheduled time or whatever, you know, responsibilities, time with the kids, whatever it is, but they're pursuing their desire. They're pursuing their goal. The runner who wants this is choosing to get to know themselves, to evolve their identity, to go from being a runner to being a marathoner. Like they're really, even if between deciding that and completing the race, there are going to be many, many portals of resistance when they choose to do it, even if there's some like anxiety or nervousness. They are really being pulled forward by their desire and by inspiration and by what's possible. And that's just a really different orientation than she's not going to be around.
Hmm.
And so I think what's really important is to, if you try to navigate both of those at the same time, it is extremely frustrating. But if you take time for both of you to really be in one person's perspective and discuss it and look for what would be helpful and comforting and what are the needs, and then look at the other person's, that is likely to allow both people to really feel seen, heard, honored, and to get their needs met. And in fact, if there's anything that my husband and I have some kind of a difference in opinion about, I mean, it's one thing if we're having an argument, but I'm thinking more something like this,
Hmm.
that we'll typically say like, what's your bandwidth if we're stressed out, or just like where are you 0 to 10.
Hmm.
And it's obviously not the most precise metric, and we may not even have the same scales, but he may say, I'm at a 6 on this, and I'm going to say, I'm at a 3. I have no idea how I'm going to add you being gone that much to everything else I'm handling. And so the point is that if you do that, you just check in this way, 0 to 10, or if, like, for us that's the easiest because it's a nice range. But you could also do, are you green, yellow, or red,
Hmm.
with red being like, I can't take anymore. Yellow, I'm getting there. Green is like, yeah, tell me what you want. I've got my own opinions. I don't agree with you, but let's hear it. Um, but when you check in and you just know where each of you are at the beginning, and then if you're using the numerical system, then whoever's lower is the one that you engage with first, because the person with the lower number is not really, like, if I am at a 3, I don't actually have the capacity to be genuinely present and open to new ways of looking at things and so forth. If we're both at a 3, then we just don't discuss it. Then, it's time to take a nap, or I don't know what. But
Yeah.
but for us and for my clients, most of the time, the two people are not at the same number, and whoever's lower, you can really get into whatever's up for them.
Hmm.
And then there's a kind of a spaciousness, and maybe it's, once it's complete, you look into things from the other person's perspective. Maybe you do it another day. It doesn't matter. The main thing is, if you really delve into how it is for one person, that you make sure to circle back and look at it from the other person's perspective. Because once you work it through with the person whose number is lower, everything feels so much better and more aligned, that it's very easy, if the other person was an 8, to never come back to really having that discussion from their perspective, but for this to really serve the connection and the emotional intimacy and every other flavor of intimacy, you really need to honor both.
Yeah, I love that advice. I mean, this works outside of running too, but the
Yes,
what's
of
your
course.
bandwidth? That's really great. And we're all familiar with pain scale, so 1 to 10 also
Yeah,
works well. Yeah.
exactly.
I've had a couple of, I'm thinking as you were talking about this, like two maybe unexpected things with clients where I started coaching toward the marathon, and I had a couple who both husband and wife were running, and he said that after the half marathon he was going to drop off and he didn't want to do the marathon, but then after the half marathon he kept going and they both ran the marathon together. And so I loved that, of course. And I started coaching and coaching the female partner, and then he would hop onto coaching calls as well, and that was really fun. So I love when they come along for the ride and end up at the finish line as well. And the other one I was thinking of is maybe the runner who, yes, they decide to run the marathon, and then the spouse is a huge supporter and goes and cheers them on, and works out a way for the kids to be at different mile markers, holding signs, and becomes like a cheerleader for the marathoner. So I've had that happen too.
Yeah, because I think, there are the couples where everyone is just ultra busy. So whether you're ultra busy with running or something else, it's sort of equivalent. That's one scenario. But then there's also the couple where any kind of quote extra time is spent with one another or doing household projects. And because of the nature of attachment styles, it's very easy when one person focuses on running or any other endeavor, but even some like that's not a vice. It's not like they're doing cocaine. It's
Yeah.
running that it can still really trigger the other person's either anxious attachment style or avoidant attachment style. More likely, it's the anxious attachment style that gets triggered there. And what I mean is that, like, that it can trigger and feel slightly destabilizing. And so the partner who isn't running can feel rejected, even though the partner who's running doesn't have any part of them which is rejecting their spouse, but it is totally within the range of normal and easy when you're the running spouse in this scenario to be like, why does he or she need to be so self-centered? This isn't about them. Well, the way attachment styles work is you can say that all you want, but when you turn your energy and attention and time to something else, it can feel like a rejection. So really, everything that we've talked about throughout this conversation, I'm thinking will really serve someone in that situation, because the key is to drop into more emotional intimacy, more connection, even if your conversation is entirely logistical. Just slowing your pace, as I'm intentionally embodying right now, feels much more connecting than having all the details come at someone who is feeling rejected by your new passion, even as he or she supports you.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You're speaking my language. Slow your pace. For sure. Well, I feel like maybe we need to do a part two. I feel like we just scratched the surface, but it was really amazing.
I'm so glad, and I'm so curious to know, when your audience watches, like, what are the next questions that come after we've had this conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for everybody listening out there, feel free to email or just drop them in the comments, because we can always do a part two. I'd love to have Dr. Alexandra back. This was amazing.
Well, I would love that too. Thank you so much. And I really love how, even though we didn't use this word during our conversation, you really embody permission for people to develop parts of themselves that otherwise remain dormant. It's just beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Well, tell everyone where they can find you. I know you gave us the name of your podcast at the beginning, which is amazing, but tell everybody where to find you on social media, and I will also leave your links below too.
Okay, wonderful. So my website, alexandrastockwell.com, is a great place to go. And from there, you can click the link and download the first chapter of my book. You can find all of my social media, but I'm intimacy doctor pretty much everywhere on social media, including YouTube. So you can certainly hop on over to my YouTube channel for more conversations. Some are G, some are PG, and some are more in the R direction, and you can choose what speaks to you.
I love it. And I will leave those links below. So thank you everybody for listening. And if you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. If you liked it, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And if you are a newer runner or a runner who hasn't run in a while and you're looking to get back into the sport, you can find out how to work with me over on my website, which is mindful-marathon.com. See you on the next episode.